My mother, Brenda, performed the most dramatic, theatrical eye roll I had ever seen the second I walked into federal courtroom number 4. It wasn't a subtle thing. It was a masterpiece of maternal contempt that culminated in her staring at the ceiling as if asking God what she'd done to deserve this inconvenience. The inconvenience, of course, was me. She was dressed for the part of the grieving daughter in a somber, tailored black dress. Beside her, my father, Richard, the former NFL quarterback, just scowled, looking bored. To them, I was just the final, pesky obstacle standing between them and the $3.2 million estate left behind by the only man who had ever truly been my father. Their lawyer, a slick-looking man named Kinsley, gave me a condescending smirk as I took my seat. Then, the bailiff called the court to order. Judge Elias Thorne entered, a man whose wisdom and stern fairness I had respected for years. He sat, adjusted his glasses, and began to review the docket. Case number 22 CV819, he began. Morrison versus Parker. He paused, his eyes scanning the room. They passed over Brenda and Richard, then landed on me. He froze. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed in disbelief. "The court docket lists the defendant as Ava. Ava Parker?" He looked directly at me. "Counselor, these charges are against you?" Brenda and Richard exchanged a confused glance, their smirk finally vanishing. They didn't get it. They had no idea that I was Assistant U.S. Attorney Ava Parker, a federal prosecutor who had argued dozens of cases in this very building. And they certainly had no idea that Judge Thorne was my mentor. They had no idea who I really was. Let me take you back 32 years. I was 3 months old when my existence became an intolerable burden. The year was 1990. My mother, Brenda, was 19, a former prom queen. My father, Richard, was 22, a charismatic quarterback newly drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles. They were living the Instagram-perfect life, and a screaming infant didn't match their aesthetic. So, they did what profoundly selfish people do. They solved their problem by making me someone else's. One cold October morning, they drove the 2 hours from their flashy Philly condo to Brooklyn and deposited me on the doorstep of my maternal grandparents. The official story was that it was temporary. Just for a few months, Brenda had cooed, handing me over to my grandmother, Ruth. Just until Richard gets settled in with the season. My grandfather, Arthur, a man who could read a legal brief and a human being with the same incisive clarity, saw right through it. My grandmother, Ruth, ever the optimist, simply took me into her arms. She watched them get back into their car and disappear down the street, off to their important, child-free lives. Those few months stretched into 32 years. They stepped into the void Brenda and Richard had left, not as substitutes, but as the real thing. They didn't just give me a home, they gave me a childhood. My earliest memory isn't of my parents. It's of standing on a rickety wooden stool in my grandmother's kitchen, a cloud of flour on my hair. I had dumped an entire bag of chocolate chips into the cookie dough. Instead of scolding me, Grandma Ruth just laughed. "Well," she said, wiping a smudge of flour from my nose, "the best cookies always have extra love and extra chocolate." She never made me feel like a mistake. She made me feel like an essential ingredient. My grandfather, Arthur Parker, was a federal judge. When he came home, he'd hang up his formidable reputation with his coat and listen to my 5-year-old ramblings about squirrels with the same intensity he gave lawyers in his courtroom. The visits from Brenda and Richard were rare and surgically brief. Brenda would sweep in, kiss the air near my cheek, and scroll through her phone. Richard would often just stay in the car, the engine rumbling impatiently. I remember my first piano recital in 3rd grade. I'd practiced for at least 4 months. Grandma Ruth helped me pick out a velvet dress, and Grandpa Arthur sat in the front row, holding an ancient camcorder. I had mailed an invitation to Brenda and Richard myself. They didn't come. They didn't even call. Later that night, I asked Grandma Ruth why. She sat on the edge of my bed and gave me a lesson. Ava, sweetheart, she said softly, some people are like beautiful, empty vases. They look nice, but there's nothing inside to give. Don't waste your life trying to get water from an empty vase. The people who love you will always show up. Always. In that moment, I understood. My family was right there, in that room. The people in Philadelphia were just relatives. Here's the part of the story Brenda and Richard were banking on me never finding out. My grandfather, Arthur, had been quietly sending them a check every single month since the day they dropped me off. $3,000. Every month. For over 20 years. It wasn't child support, my grandparents paid for everything. It was, I think, his attempt to buy their decency, to give them no excuse for their absence. They took every last cent. It added up to more than $800,000. That money didn't go towards a savings account for me. It went into the black hole of Richard's failed business ventures, the high-end Philly gym that went bankrupt, the sportswear line that never produced a shirt. They cashed my grandfather's checks and, in return, gave him silence. When I was 18, my world shattered. I was a freshman at Georgetown when Grandma Ruth died. It was Thanksgiving weekend. She suffered a massive stroke in her garden while planting tulip bulbs for the spring. I drove the 4 hours home in a daze and found my grandfather sitting in the dark, chilly garden, still holding the small, papery bulb she had dropped. He looked old, suddenly and irrevocably old. We sat there together until the sun came up, not speaking. Brenda and Richard came to the funeral. They arrived late and left early. Brenda produced a series of dramatic, well-timed sobs. Richard repeatedly checked his watch. They didn't stay for the reception. We have to get back, Brenda murmured, giving me an awkward hug. Richard has an important charity dinner tonight. An important charity dinner. My grandmother was dead, and they had to get back for a photo opportunity. That was the moment any lingering hope I had for them died and was buried alongside my grandmother. They were beautiful, empty vases. After Grandma Ruth's death, Grandpa Arthur and I became a team. I transferred to Penn Law School to be closer to him, and our Sunday dinners became a sacred ritual. They were my real education. Remember, Ava, he'd say, never confuse what is legal with what is right. Your job is to make them the same thing as often as possible. And remember, presence is 9/10 of love. I graduated at the top of my class. He sat in the front row, beaming. Brenda and Richard sent a card. 2 sentences. I landed a position at the U.S. Attorney's Office and threw myself into the work, prosecuting people who believed they were entitled to things they hadn't earned, people just like them. When I was 28, Brenda called for the first time in 3 years. Richard was being sued for fraud. You're a lawyer now, Ava, she said, her tone expectant. You need to help your father. A cold calm washed over me. First, I said, I'm a criminal prosecutor. I put people like him in jail. Second, even if I wasn't, I wouldn't help him. Her voice dripped with venom. After everything we've done for you, you ungrateful little. Everything you've done for me? I cut her off. You did nothing. Arthur and Ruth did everything. Do not call me again. I hung up, my hand trembling with the exhilarating shock of my own freedom. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Every comment helps this video reach more people. Thank you so much for your support. Now, back to the story. Grandpa Arthur passed away peacefully in his sleep 4 years later, at the age of 87. I was 32. I was with him. The will reading took place a week later. I expected he'd leave me some personal effects. I was not prepared for what he actually did. Mr. Harrison, his attorney, read from the document, I do hereby bequeath my entire estate, real and personal, to my beloved granddaughter, Ava Parker. Everything. the Brooklyn brownstone, the investment portfolio, his savings. A total of $3.2 million. It all went to me. Mr. Harrison then handed me a sealed envelope with a letter inside. My dearest Ava, it began. You have earned this. Not through the accident of blood, but through 32 years of showing up. But there was one more thing, a heavy banker's box. He knew they would contest it, Mr. Harrison said grimly. He prepared for it. Inside was my grandfather's final legal argument, decades of meticulous records, every bank statement, every pleading email, every cancelled visit. He had armed me. 30 days later, the lawsuit landed. Undue influence. Diminished capacity. I actually laughed. They had no idea. Which brings us back to that courtroom. Kinsley, their lawyer, painted me as a manipulative shrew and Brenda as the victim. Then he called her to the stand, where she performed her grief beautifully. He was my rock, she whispered. But my parents, they kept her from me. They turned my own daughter against me. Then, it was Mr. Harrison's turn. He rose slowly, his demeanor calm and lethal. Mrs. Morrison, he began, you testified that your parents kept Ava from you. Is it not true that you voluntarily left your 3-month-old daughter with them? I was young, she snapped. I'm sure you were, Harrison said smoothly. Let's talk about visits. In the last 10 years of your father's life, your father's calendars, entered into evidence, show you visited a total of 8 times. Less than once a year. Is that accurate? I had expenses. A life. Ah yes, the expenses, Harrison said. Your father gave you $3,000 every single month, for over 20 years. Over $800,000. Is that correct? Brenda flushed a deep red. It was a family allowance. Let's be more specific. When was the last time you saw your father alive? A long, damning silence. It was his birthday, she mumbled. His 84th birthday, Harrison supplied. 3 years before his death. You stayed for 90 minutes. Isn't it true, Mrs. Morrison, that your visits stopped almost entirely right after your father informed you there would be no more emergency funds available for Richard's business ventures? Isn't it true that when the extra money dried up, so did you? She stared at him, her mask of grief replaced by pure fury. She had no answer. Richard's testimony was even worse. He tried to play the role of the affable father kept at a distance by a difficult father-in-law. Mr. Harrison approached the lectern. Mr. Morrison, he began, let's talk about how unwelcome you were. Can you name a single school play you attended for your daughter? Richard blustered. My schedule was very demanding. I see, Harrison said, turning on a projector. A photo flashed onto the screen, me, 17, at my high school graduation, flanked by my beaming grandparents. You were retired by this point. Where were you? I might have had a business trip. Another photo. Me at my Georgetown graduation. Grandpa Arthur, front and center. Where are you, Mr. Morrison? I don't know. I can't remember. Another photo. Me at my Penn Law graduation. He probably didn't invite me. Richard snapped. Let's talk about invitations, Harrison said, his voice turning to steel. He projected a scanned invitation. This is for the ceremony where your daughter was sworn in as an assistant United States attorney. A ceremony presided over by Judge Arthur Parker himself. It was mailed to your home. Did you attend, Mr. Morrison? Richard stared at the screen, trapped. No, Harrison repeated softly. You missed her entire life. And now, his voice rose, you ask this court to award you half of the estate earned by the man who did show up? The man who was there for every single one of those moments. He turned off the projector. I have no further questions for this, Father. When it was my turn, Kinsley tried to paint me as a greedy manipulator. Isn't it true you saw a lonely old man and decided to manipulate him for his money? He sneered. I leaned into the microphone. Mr. Kinsley, I spent the last decade working 70-hour weeks to build my own career. If my motivation was money, I chose a remarkably inefficient path. I chose to be there because he was my grandfather. He was my home. He was worth more than any amount of money. And that is a concept your clients will never, ever understand. Judge Thorne didn't even adjourn. I have known Judge Arthur Parker for 25 years, he said, his voice echoing in the room. The suggestion that he was suffering from diminished capacity is a deplorable insult to his memory. The evidence shows a clear pattern of absence by the plaintiffs and a pattern of devotion by the defendant. This court finds entirely in favor of the defendant. The will stands as written. He wasn't finished. Furthermore, I find this lawsuit was brought for frivolous reasons. This court hereby orders the plaintiffs to pay all of the defendant's legal fees. The gavel came down with a sharp, final crack. It was over. In the corridor, Brenda rushed towards me, grabbing my arm. Ava, she cried. You can't do this to us. I'm your mother. I calmly removed her hand. No, I said, my voice soft but firm. You are the woman who gave birth to me. That is a biological fact. My mother was Ruth Parker. She died 14 years ago. You had over 11,000 days to show up. You chose not to. You don't get to choose my grandfather's money now. We're done. I turned and walked away without looking back, the weight of a lifetime finally gone. I was free. 3 years later, I was appointed as a federal judge, wearing my grandfather's old robes on my first day. His legacy was now my own. Family, I've learned, is not an accident of biology. It is a daily choice. Justice was served in the courtroom, but I have to ask you, did I do the right thing by cutting them out of my life completely? Or should I have left the door open, no matter how badly they behaved? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice and family drama. Remember, you don't owe loyalty to people who never earned it.